Okay, I think the numbers are starting to slow down. So I am going to get started. So, welcome everybody to another installment of webinars for busy lawyers, Jedi Mind Tricks for Lawyers, Effective Ways to Respond to Bullying Behavior. And we're excited to have you join us for today's webinar presented by Dr. Shawn Healy. My name is Amy Levine, the Director of Programs and Volunteers at Lawyers Concern for Lawyers, and I will be your host today. I'm going to introduce Shawn momentarily. If you are joining us for the first time, LCL offers one-on-one consultations with licensed clinicians on mental health, substance use disorders, and well-being. Additionally, we provide educational programming, support groups, and one-on-one consultations on law practice management for the entire Massachusetts legal community. Our services are confidential and free. One housekeeping tip: we love and encourage questions, and those will be answered after Dr. Healy finishes his presentation. Please use either the chat or the Q&A functions, and we will do our best to get to everybody's questions. And now I would like to introduce Dr. Shawn Healy. He is the Director of Administrative Operations at LCL, as well as a clinical psychologist. He regularly presents and publishes on all manner of mental health topics germane to the legal community. He serves as co-chair of the Massachusetts Bar Association's Lawyer Wellbeing Committee. Shawn joined LCL over 10 years ago following his work in private practice and at the May Institute. He graduated from Suffolk University with his doctorate in clinical psychology. His dissertation and research interests are in the field of conflict resolution, and he's been involved in facilitating many conflict resolutions workshops, discussion groups, and mediation and private conflict coaching sessions. Additionally, he is co-authored the book, or he is the co-author of a book, The Full Weight of the Law: How Legal Professionals Can Recognize and Rebound from Depression. He co-authored that with another LCL clinical psychologist, Dr. Jeff Working. And finally, Shawn runs our ADHD support group meetings and workshops and co-facilitates our mental health first aid certification course. And without further ado, I am going to hand it over to Dr. Healy.
Well, thank you, Amy, and thank you all for joining today. I am going to share my screen for some slides. I will give the warning or the heads up that I tried to pack a lot of information into this presentation. There's much more to talk about than I'm able to talk about today, and the depth at which I'm able to get into all these different topics is limited. So all to say, if you miss something, don't worry about it. Feel free to come back to this information in the recording. So I want to start off with just sort of emphasizing the point that incivility or bullying has a direct impact on our well-being and the well-being of the legal profession. And so it's not only something that is sort of near and dear to people's hearts because it affects them directly, but it has a bigger impact. So it's not just an individual issue. It is a systemic issue that needs to be addressed in multiple ways. And there's lots of groups and people talking about how to address the issues of incivility in the legal field. The other thing I want to start off with is two warnings that I often give. For this one, the first warning is that I use a lot of metaphors, and some of my metaphors might seem a little unusual for a presentation on responding to bullying. There's a lot of combat sports references. The other thing is, because I cover a lot of information, I want to encourage you not to do everything that I suggest, because if you tried to do that, that would be overwhelming. And so take it slowly. If something sticks out to you as potentially helpful, I would sort of start with that. But basically, pace yourself. Don't try to do too much. So I thought it'd be helpful to start off with what is often some common messages that we get, particularly in childhood, growing up in terms of how to respond to being bullied. And some common messages that we get. One is to ignore the bully, and they will eventually stop bullying you. The other is to like stand up to the bully, punch the bully in the mouth, and they will stop bullying you. These are two very different messages and approaches. I don't recommend either one in the way that they're commonly suggested, primarily because it it basically has you decide on what you're going to do based on what the bully does. Right? So the bully decides what your response is. So you're taking your cues from the bully. My strong recommendation is for you to have a sense of how you want to respond generally to all sorts of situations, and that be your guiding principle as opposed to deciding what to do based on what is done to you first. And so hopefully that'll be clear, but there's obviously some nuance there, which we'll get into. So my first metaphor that's unusual is a boxing metaphor. So Mike Tyson is famously quoted as saying, "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face." And the idea here is that sometimes we have a specific plan that like, this is how I want to handle these situations, right? If someone's being a bully to me or in civil, like this is how I'm going to like chart out what I'm going to do in response. And oftentimes having a very specific plan is not very helpful because the way that things unfold is usually not how we imagine them, right? So to Mike Tyson's point, like you can have, a fight unfold in your mind ahead of time and have a very specific plan on how you're going to address your opponent. But the reality starts when you actually start engaging, right? And with bullying, oftentimes the first thing that happens is you're surprised, right? You might not have expected that bullying response, right? So sometimes you're caught off guard, and that initial response kind of like throws your plan out. So instead of a specific plan, I like to encourage people to focus on a general strategy. And so I'll sort of unpack what that means, but basically it's to have an overarching sort of guiding principle or a general way of doing things, as opposed to having a very specific, oh, if that person says this, I'm going to say this right back. Two things to keep in mind in terms of a helpful approach or response to bullying. One is to make sure that whatever your approach is, it's an active approach, right? So going back to that example of like things that we hear in childhood of just ignore the bully and hopefully they'll eventually stop bullying you. Whenever it feels like I don't have a choice, therefore I have to sort of withdraw or freeze or hide, that often doesn't feel like an active approach. Now, an active approach means that you're deciding what to do. It's intentional, okay? And the other important component here is that active approaches can vary widely, and they should vary widely given the circumstance, given, all the different elements of a situation. So for example, I might decide to ignore somebody's inappropriate behavior, or I might decide to address someone's inappropriate behavior. Both of those things are active because I'm deciding, I'm taking an approach that I've decided on for a very specific reason. So ignoring can be an active approach, but it really has to be a choice as opposed to feeling like I don't know what to do. Therefore, I'm left with only sort of avoiding or being quiet or just taking this. It's a very different feeling when it's an active ignoring and then addressing something else versus I don't know what to do, therefore I can't address anything. So be active and also keep in mind that your approaches are going to look differently based on a whole slew of factors, which I'll get into. So developing a strategy, a general strategy, can look like this. This is not the only way to do it, but this is my suggestion. One is to start with yourself, right? So to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, to make sure that you are getting your needs met so that you are sort of resourced in a way that's going to help you respond the best that you can. When you don't take care of yourself, when you're like totally drained, when you're sleep deprived, when you're like your bandwidth is like nothing, right? It's really difficult to be able to navigate difficult situations, and particularly with bullying behavior, right? So when I feel rested, when I feel like I can regulate my mood better, when I feel like I have resources internally, then I'm able to navigate those situations better. If I'm really tired or not feeling well, or like feel drained, that's going to be much harder to navigate those difficult situations. So always starting with yourself, being aware of like, are my needs being met? If not, how can I meet them better? How can I prioritize those things? Because that's going to help me not only respond better, but also serve my clients better. It's going to help me navigate the world better. The second thing is to be aware, right? When I increase my awareness, one, I'm able to assess how am I doing and am I taking care of myself? But also I can ask myself, what is it that I need, right? Um, do I need social support? Do I need other people involved in the situation? Do I need to um, dust off some old strategies? Do I need to think about it differently? Like what's going to be helpful to me? Also, what's in my control, right? When I'm trying to control something outside of my control, that's when stress and pressure just ramps up. So I don't like being bullied, but I have to realize I can't control someone from bullying me. If I'm trying to control them directly, I'm going to get really frustrated. But if I focus on things that are within my control, my response, my strategies, things like that, I'm going to feel more resilient. I'm going to feel more in control. Also being aware of how my surroundings affect me and what my bandwidth is moment to moment, because my ideal response to bullying might not be an option certain days. There are going to be certain situations or certain days when like I just don't have what it takes to have my ideal response. So I need to have other options. Like some days I'm just going to like, no, I'm going to need to protect myself versus address it directly. So feeling like I can assess how I am moment to moment and then what my options are that are going to suit me best in that moment are really important. Also is to be focused on your goal, right? So decide ahead of time what your goal is. And this can be a specific goal, it can be a general goal. So like your goal can be, I want to maintain my professionalism regardless of how other people are treating me. Or I want to be a role model to, the associates in my office or to my, mentee that I'm trying to show how to do this. Or I want to be that representative to my client who's unflappable. Whatever that goal is, make sure that you decide that ahead of time so that that can guide you as opposed to deciding moment to moment sort of what you're going to do in response to other people's behavior. Next is to be the change you want to see in the world. So there are times when it's really helpful to think about how your response is going to be a role model to others, whether that is maintaining your professionalism, whether it's calling something out directly, whether it's gathering other people to make a change to a situation. Being aware of how you can be that change in the world is helpful. And also, when you're not the recipient of that bullying, how can you be an ally to others who you observe are the recipient? And then finally, to be prepared. And what I mean by that is to get to know different techniques and different options for how to respond to bullying behavior. Practice them, get comfortable with them, so that when you do need them, that's not the first time that you've tried them. You've actually tried them ahead of time, and it's a little easier to activate those responses in the moment when you're under pressure. So number one was taking care of yourself. So make sure you're prioritizing your sleep, diet, and exercise. Make sure that you're practicing mindfulness to sort of be in touch with how you're doing moment to moment. And that will allow you to identify options and resources in those moments that are going to be helpful. Mindfulness will also help you to understand how events in your environment are affecting you. So for example, if bullying behavior starts small and then ramps up, when you're mindful, you're able to pick up those changes with that earlier behavior before it gets to sort of full-blown bullying, so to speak. And so being able to recognize that in other people, being able to recognize how that affects you is helpful. Also, make sure that you have social supports. One of the things that makes almost every situation worse is feeling like you're doing it alone. that you don't have people to talk to, you don't have people supporting you. So make sure that you have those supports ahead of time. Be thinking right now, like who would I lean on? Who would I talk to? Who would I go to for support if I needed it? And having that sort of fresh in your mind is helpful. Um, Whether or not you use those social supports in the moment or afterwards is another decision, but making sure that you have an awareness of who you have on your team, so to speak, for that social support. Another one is cognitive restructuring, which is all about how I'm thinking about myself, other people, the situation, the world. And so when I realize that the way that I think about something has a huge impact on how I respond, how I feel, and what I do, then making changes to how I think about something can be very advantageous, based on the circumstances, which I'll get into in a bit. And also making sure that you have things in your life that sort of fill you back up, like hobbies, fun activities, so that you're not just working, sleeping, and then going back to work. The next was be aware, right? So one of the things to be aware of is what do you have within your direct control, right? What are your options where you can make a change? Most of the time, those changes are directly within you, right? How you interpret a situation, how you ask for help, how you use your resources, how you respond, like all those things you have control over. Sometimes it feels like you don't have control over a lot of that stuff. Particularly with bullying situations, it can often feel like someone else is making you feel a certain way, right? This bully is being unkind or incivil to me or hostile to me. And now I'm having this feeling that I didn't want to have. I didn't want to, be stressed out today. I didn't want to feel like I'm under threat, but now I am feeling this way. So it can feel like that bully has controlled my feeling. Whenever that happens, like we naturally will feel less in control because it feels like someone's pulling our strings. Whenever that is the case, it's really helpful to be aware of what do I have control of? I have control over recognizing that feeling, recognizing my response to that situation, and then trying to control my response. So I can control my breathing. I can control like how I'm thinking about it. I can control, if I can sort of insert a pause, which I'll get into in a bit, right? There's lots of things that I can control. And if I focus on those things, then I can sort of change that dynamic for myself quite a bit. For those things that I can't control, it's helpful to focus on the things that I can, which is talking about them, right? I can control talking to others so I'm not, feeling like I'm alone in this. Right? And talking with others helps me share that burden. It doesn't necessarily change the situation, but now suddenly I feel like I'm not alone and the burden itself feels lighter, even though it's unchanged. Another thing you can do is just to focus on your resilience, right? You can sort of reinterpret the situation as like, this is not an indicator that I've done something wrong or that, I've hit a roadblock, but I can actually focus on how in the past I've gotten through difficult situations and I've become stronger as a result. So focusing on my ability to be resilient is helpful in those situations. I can also adopt new well-being routines. A very common situation is that if I do have some nice well-being routines, sometimes they go unchanged for a really long time because they've worked, right? I'm used to them, they're part of my routine. But my life changes, my demands change, my stress changes. And so it's really helpful to be able to add new well-being routines or reevaluate the ones that I have been using to see like, are these still the most effective ones for me? Or do I need more? And how can I explore those? Another important tip is to have multiple tools for various circumstances. And I kind of hinted at this already. Like a bullying situation is going to look differently based on who the bully is, how they're bullying you, the environment, like your relationship to that bully. And so like your response is going to look different. And it can be helpful to have a number of responses or tools available to you that you feel like I can fit the appropriate tool into the appropriate circumstance. The next thing on that original list was to be focused on your goal. Right? So again, it's kind of like the over the overall guiding theme of a case, right? Where like, I want to make sure that what I'm doing is getting me closer and closer to this ultimate conclusion. I want to make sure that I'm guided by this theme. So making sure that your goal guides you. So for example, whether the opposing counsel is courteous or like the biggest bully in the world, I want to make sure that my goal is the same in terms of representing my client or making sure that, I'm sticking to my priorities and not being, derailed by somebody else's behavior. So having that ahead of time is helpful because even if you get distracted, that can be something to pull you back. Like, all right, this is where I want to have my energy. I don't want to give control over my attention and energy to somebody else. I want to make sure that I'm deciding for me. So having that predetermined goal and your approach to your interactions can be very helpful. Right? Again, this is not going to prevent you from having a particular reaction or a response to a bully, but it's helpful to have that as like your roadmap. And then what this helps you do is it helps you stay focused on your decision and not waiting for somebody else to do something for you then to just react to it. And so you might react to their behaviors, unexpected behaviors for sure, but having that roadmap ahead of time can help you make sure that you're on course for where you want to be as opposed to where they want you to be. The other element is to be the change you want to see in the world. So first and foremost, it can be really challenging when you're dealing with a bullying situation and it feels like other people are observing but not intervening. And it can feel like that quiet agreement or complacency of like, well, if no one's speaking up, maybe they agree, right? Or if the judge isn't stopping this, maybe the judge agrees. All right. So it can feel like the absence of intervention is implicit agreement with what the bully's doing. So one is to sort of remind or think about the audience as potential people who don't know what to do, but they're going to learn from you. And they're going to sort of learn how to deal with a bully better by watching you deal with this bully or respond to this bully. And the other thing is, in that silent audience, sometimes it can feel like other people aren't seeing what I'm seeing, right? Like other people might be interpreting this not as bullying, but just as like, oh, that's fine, right? So it can feel like, do other people see this? Like, am I the only one? So it's helpful to remind yourself that other people are seeing it too, even if they're not responding, which is unfortunate, or saying anything. It's helpful to remind yourself that other people are seeing it the way I'm seeing it. So that can help you stick to your original goals about how you want to respond overall. The other thing is to prioritize being an ally, right? Again, sometimes when you think back to childhood and like bullying in the school system, sometimes the subject of the bullying, when they're not being bullied, they don't necessarily feel empowered to stick up for someone else who's being bullied. They're just glad that they're not the target of being bullied anymore. And so when you're noticing that someone else is the target, it's really helpful to be an ally and to step in to help out. And then if you see something, say something, even if it's awkward. Say something to the person affected. If you don't feel comfortable saying it to the person doing the bullying, make sure the person who's the target of that bullying knows that you saw what they saw, you heard what they heard, and that you're there as a support for them. In terms of being prepared, the other metaphor is to become a martial arts master. You could literally do this, which is a great confidence builder to study martial arts, but metaphorically as well. And what I mean by this is a martial arts master knows a lot of techniques that are appropriate for all level of conflict, whether it's like talking to someone all the way up to physical combat. If you feel comfortable with an array of responses, all the way from, a rude comment all the way up to really inappropriate, unprofessional bullying behavior, if you're comfortable all along the way, then you feel more confidence and you feel like there's nothing along the way that is outside my realm of mastery or ability. So again, just becoming more comfortable with those responses and those situations and practicing can be very helpful. One thing to practice is, throw out another metaphor for you, is the metaphor of a magician, right? So if you've ever watched a really good magician, it can be impressive. Like, wow, like I don't know what they were doing. They totally fooled me. Like, I'm really impressed with their magic trick. Versus a bad magician who's like, oh, like that was a really lame attempt. That's like, I saw that the whole time. You weren't fooling anybody. When you're viewing your bully like a good magician, like they are powerful, they know what they're doing, and it's impressive, you're going to feel more threatened. If you can start to see any bully as a bad magician, it's like, I see through your trick. I know what you're trying to do, and I can see your technique. Suddenly, you feel less threatened because it's not impressive anymore. It's unpleasant, but it's no longer impressive. And so having an effective strategy involves understanding why a bullying strategy works and also why your strategy can work. So, for example, one element here is using your strengths to your advantage. So you don't have to become somebody different in order to have effective responses to bullying behavior. You can use your strengths. So if you are like more outgoing, right? If you use humor, right, more often than not, you can use that to your advantage. If you're quiet, right, and you're more introverted, you can use those strengths to your advantage as well. So don't feel like you have to change who you are to sort of fit yourself into a particular technique, but look for techniques that fit your strengths, but also that can stretch you as well, so that you can have techniques that would require some practice that might not be totally comfortable, but you can get comfortable with them. And then practice those techniques. One of those techniques is to address fears head on. So when we're talking about bullying, at the basic level, what we're talking about is a threat response, right? Suddenly I feel threatened in some way, and my body reacts, my mind reacts to protect myself. Sometimes that's to withdraw, sometimes that's to freeze, sometimes that's to fight. And so it's helpful to be aware of, what is it that I'm afraid of? What am I afraid might happen? And then address those fears head on. So am I afraid that people will think less of me? Am I afraid that the bully who threatens to call the BBO and complain about me, I'm afraid they're going to make that call? So addressing a fear head on is thinking about, okay, if that worst case scenario happened, what would I do? Okay. And then getting comfortable with your response of what you would do. When we do that, when we address fears head on, the power of that fear starts to decrease, right? That is no longer such a bad weapon for the bully. So I'm like, all right, I'm actually, more in control. And then the last thing on the slide is change the game. So for example, that example of a bullying threatening to call the BBO, I've often told people, like, have the BBO's number on your desk. And if someone threatens you, I'm going to file a complaint. I'm like, oh, okay, here you go. Here's the number. You have a pen? Right? So like, when the bully's trying to influence you to do something with a threat, and you say, oh, you have a threat? Let me take that threat. Yeah, let's do that. Right? Suddenly you're taking the power away from the bully. That's just one example of changing the game. But like, thinking about what that game that the bully's playing, knowing what the rules are, and then shifting it can not only make you feel more empowered, but it's very disorienting to a bully. In terms of threat response, part of the threat response is your perception about the threat itself, right? How big is the threat? How threatening is it? And also your perception of yourself. Am I strong and able to meet that threat, or am I not? And so thinking specifically about those two things and the relationship between the two. If the threat is high, but I'm also very capable, well, like, okay, I can handle it. If the threat is low and I'm very capable, I'm good. If the threat is low, but also I'm not very confident, I'm okay too. It's really when the threat is high, but I don't feel capable. That's when the threat is the most threatening. And so we can try to change our perception of the threat as well as change our perception of ourselves. And so, for example, changing the perception of the threat, I use this stock image here of a goth kid, right? When I look at this picture, initially my response is like, oh, he looks unfriendly. He looks closed off. He looks maybe angry. I don't know that I, feel like I want to have a conversation with him if this is a stranger. But then when I start to reevaluate the threat, I start to look beyond the surface. I'm like, what I actually see is someone who's trying to communicate to me to like stay away, right? When someone's putting that much effort into like stay away, that means they're vulnerable. They feel vulnerable and they actually see me as the threat. And so when I start to see this person differently, now like he's no longer a threat and I'm actually much more capable. If he's seeing me as the threat, I don't have to feel as threatened by him. And so practicing that can be really helpful, as well as sort of like this basic idea that what people portray to us, what they're trying to show us, isn't the full story. And when I'm aware that, you know what, deep down inside, we're all just vulnerable kids. That stuff that I carry from childhood, that's still in there. I've worked on strategies, I've matured, I've developed, I've gained skills, but I still have those doubts, I still have those insecurities, and so does everybody else. And so when I'm aware of that, I'm usually aware of that for myself. But when I remind myself that everybody else is like that too, everybody else seems less threatening because like, oh yeah, like they might be responding to the situation like a bully, but they actually might feel threatened themselves. And they're trying to make sure that nobody approaches them. So I mentioned that your response might be different based on the situation. So for example, if opposing counsel is the source of the bullying, or if it's a pro se litigant, if it's a judge, if it's a client, if it's a coworker or manager, your response might be different. So for a client, if your client's bullying you, that might need some boundaries and expectations. So that might look like you saying to your client, like, this is what I'm going to offer. Or if they're speaking to you in a way that's disrespectful, you might say like, you know what, I don't actually let people talk to me like that. I can see that you're upset. I'm going to end this conversation, but I'm happy to pick it back up when you're ready to talk in a productive way. But right now I'm going to end the conversation. So it might be something direct like that. When it's a judge, hopefully you're involving your client to ask your client what they want to do. Like, do they want to address this situation directly, or do they want to just focus on, getting the best outcome they can in the case? When it's, opposing counsel, obviously there's lots of different ways of addressing bullying, directly, indirectly, all to say like, it's helpful to sort of consider your response based on the source of the bullying. One technique that can be really helpful, but often is difficult to do, is to create distance. So when we're in threat mode, we often feel the pressure to respond quickly. And when we can slow things down, that's one way of creating distance. Another way is to make things less personal, helps us create distance. So when, let's say it's a pro se litigant who's being inappropriate or bullying to you, asking what happened to them where they're responding this way is a helpful way of creating some distance, as opposed to asking what's wrong with them. Like, what's wrong with this person that they're treating me this way, right? Saying like, I wonder what happened to them where this is their response to their life, right? That can help me feel less personally attacked and help me understand their behavior through like, this is a trauma response due to what they're going through. It actually doesn't have to do anything with me. Another way of creating distance is to insert a literal pause to slow down the process, right? So if you feel like someone's trying to bully you to get you to do something differently, is to like not respond or not decide right away, to slow it down, to think about it, to make the implicit explicit, So like, I see what you're doing, right? Like you're trying to get me to end negotiations, or you're trying to get me to agree to something that I'm not comfortable agreeing to, right? Just sort of like explicitly putting it out there. It's like you're being disrespectful to me, right? That's one way of slowing it down. Another helpful thing is to try to understand what the bully is doing based on their objective and how that's different than who you are. Oftentimes when we're feeling bullied, it can feel like the bully can see right through us, and like they're tapping at an insecurity, right? They're telling me I don't know what I'm doing. And deep down inside, I'm questioning, do I know what I'm doing? So it feels like they can see my vulnerability. When I separate the objective from my identity, I can say like, oh, their objective is just to throw me off. They would do that to anybody. It's not about who I am or my vulnerability. It's actually just they're trying to achieve a certain objective. When I can recognize that, I can do something different. Such as when I receive an insult, I can actually interpret it as a compliment. So if someone says, you don't know what you're doing with that whole line of questioning. Well, if this is opposing counsel telling me this, why would they give me that helpful advice to correct my error? If it was true that, I don't know what I'm doing and I'm taking the wrong tact here, they would just be quiet and let me do it and torpedo my case. So the fact that they're bringing it up in an insult actually might be a compliment. Like they're recognizing I'm doing something well and they're trying to dissuade me from it. In the same way, reinterpreting a discouragement as an encouragement, right? It's like, oh, don't do that. You don't know what you're doing. Like, oh, why wouldn't you want me to do that, opposing counsel? Let me think about that. Maybe it's actually an encouragement to pursue that more. Then also a perceived attack might actually be a sign of their vulnerability. So again, inserting a pause and stepping back can help you to reevaluate, like what's the objective of this bully? Right? Is the bullying behavior trying to get me to like not focus on something I've been focusing on? And if it's coming from someone who's my opponent, like why would they do that? Is it to help me out? Probably not. That's to help them out in some way. Another thing to keep in mind is whether or not a situation is appropriate to be responded to or addressed individually by yourself, like responding to, an aggressive email, or is it a bigger issue that should involve more people to have like the light of day shined upon it? Shined. I wrote shine, so I'm going with shined. Shown did it? Anyway, so like if it's a bigger issue, racism, sexism, unethical behavior, injustice, something like that, you might want to have more eyes on it, have more intervention. Sometimes there might be situations where it's like, you know what, this is a bullying email, and I'm going to decide just to respond to it myself. And again, response might be to call it out. It might be to ignore the inappropriate stuff and the bullying stuff and just respond to the appropriate stuff. There's lots of different ways of responding. So if you decide to respond directly, make sure your response is an active response that you decide upon, as opposed to just a reaction to what they're doing. And even if your response is to ignore or to not respond, make sure that's an active choice. So examples of actively responding, calling out their bluff, right? So if they're threatening something, call their bluff, right? And again, the idea is that you've gotten a little comfortable with the end result. It's like, that's what I'm afraid of might happen. I can get more comfortable with it. I have control over that. Therefore, I can take away some of the power of that threat. And therefore, it makes it easier for me to call their bluff. You can call it out directly, just to literally state, like, oh, you're responding to me in an inappropriate way. That's really unprofessional, the way that you're speaking to me right now. Right? You don't have to make anything else happen other than I'm calling it out. I'm stating what's happening. So that's another example of making the implicit explicit, right? Like I see what you're doing, and whether that is just stating what you observed or drawing a conclusion. It seems like you really don't want me to sort of bring this before the judge. It sounds like you're trying to get me not to do that, right? To like make that explicit. And then responding directly can also involve others, right? So in negotiations, when the opposing counsel is threatening to get the judge involved because You're not negotiating good faith. You're like, okay, well, if you're threatening that, well, maybe we should involve others. Let's get the judge back in here. For allies, really briefly, I know we're short on time, my apologies. Um, if you're an ally, here's some quick don'ts. So don't try to quickly solve the problem. Don't think you need to have all the answers in order to be an ally. Don't wait to have all the facts of the situation before intervening or showing support. Don't try to simply rescue those affected. Sometimes we feel like, oh, if I can just come in and save them, that'll be the best. It's actually not the best. And also don't brush it off as insignificant. If someone comes to you and it's like, this person's bullying me, don't be like, oh, that's just how this is, you know, it's a adversarial profession, so that's what you signed up for. Don't brush it off. Instead, say something, right? Even if it's awkward, even if you don't know exactly what to say, let that person know that you see them and that you're a witness and a support to them. Let them know that, again, you saw what they saw, you heard what they heard. Make the implicit explicit. I've said that multiple times. And also ask the affected person what they think would be helpful. Instead of you deciding what you think would be best, ask them what they think would be best. Spend some of your social capital and power to make a change. So like intervene if that's what the person wants, even if it will cost you something. And then also check in with that person as time goes on to see how things are going. All right, that's the end. I know I've went too far and I'm going to stop my share now. But we do have time for questions.
Yes. And first of all, Shawn, once again, thank you for a wonderful presentation. Lots of great learning points. Some things that stood out to me is taking care of yourself and being resilient. That's a theme I think sometimes people don't think about. So that was one thing. Also, being focused on your goal. And that can help also determine your reaction and how you deal with it. I really like the magician analogy that you used and being able to see that trick that they're not a good magician and you can see through exactly what they're doing. Also, not to take things so personally or don't take it personally. This is their stuff. And one of the big themes was also changing your mindset. And so you can view the bullying differently. So again, those were a few of my takeaways. There are so many more, but we do have some questions that I want to get to. So this person says they have a variation of bullying. The opposing counsel on a case is not following through on what she says she's going to do in a contentious divorce case. This person thinks that it's intentional and they want to lash out at her, but that's not effective. What do you suggest?
A good question. Yeah, so whether the question, whether this issue is like, are they doing something to bully or they're just like doing something intentional to like to slow things down or to like muck up the process. I don't know that you have to define that, but when it seems like someone's intentionally doing something to sort of disrupt, sometimes that can be active, like I'm trying to disrupt you actively. Sometimes it can be passive, and that sounds like what you're suggesting is like it's not doing something to sort of influence or muck up the situation. I would suggest if you have communication with that opposing counsel to sort of let them know, like make that implicit explicit, like I see that this is a pattern and I'm wondering like what the objective is, right? Or I see that you said you would do something, but you consistently don't do it or you don't follow through. Like just sort of putting it out there to let people know, like I see what is going on. Because sometimes when something is not explicitly mentioned, sometimes a person might think, if it's intentional, they might think like, oh, this is working, right? I'm slowing the process down. I have the advantage. When it's explicitly acknowledged, like I see this is the pattern or this is what I've observed, sometimes that can be really disruptive to the person trying to influence the situation. So like when you call it out directly, you don't have to draw a conclusion. You don't have to make it an accusation. You can just simply say, I've noticed this. And if the person sort of doesn't respond well to that, obviously if this is in litigation, then you can, involve other people. You can ask the judge for some intervention. Um, but I would, if I, obviously knowing very little about the situation, I might start with, directly talking to the opposing counsel and letting them know what you observe and see how they respond. And then seeing like what other options do I have in terms of ramping it up. Maybe involving the judge might be, later on, but what else do I have along the way? Um, so you could also use negotiation techniques as well, depending on your relationship with the person. Um, but I think I would start there.
Excellent. We have a few more questions I want to get to.
Yeah.
Somebody asked to have you define bullying.
Bullying, that's a good question. Yeah, I didn't define that. Um, I would define bullying. I'm sure there are better definitions if you Google it or ask, dictionaries. I would define bullying as like intentional behavior that is designed to like put someone in a threat response, right? So, um, like it's not obviously the legal profession is an adversarial profession, so you can be adversarial without being a bully. You can advocate for your side and make your case aggressively or assertively without it being bullying, unprofessional, or uncivil, uncivil. Um, but like bullying is when, in my definition, is when someone's intentionally doing something to disrupt the normal sort of professional course of events in order to sort of put you in threat mode, to sort of have an advantage, or to sort of have their way illegitimately. There's different ways of bullying. So for some people, it's um, to threaten, to raise their voice, to demean, to mansplain. To there's lots of different examples. There's also different reasons why people do it. So sometimes people do it because they've been shown that that's how you do it. It's like, oh, I was trained by an aggressive litigator, and that's how that litigator did things. Like they were a bully, and they got results. And therefore, they taught me that's how you get results. It could also be because, like, I did it once, and I got rewarded for it. It's like, oh, things went my way when I was aggressive or bullying. Therefore, I'm going to do it again. A lot of what um, underlies these techniques that I'm suggesting is to disrupt that pattern of bully does something, bully gets rewarded. If bully does something and I can see what the objective is and then not provide that reward, then I can influence that slowly, or my little piece of it. So for example, if I think the bully is trying to intimidate me to shut me up, I'm like, oh, if I shut up, then I've actually given them a reward for their behavior. So maybe I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to speak up more, right? So the bully's like, you asked too many questions. Like, oh, interesting. I have a question about that, right? I'm going to ask you more questions now. If the bully is saying like, oh, you're so young and inexperienced, what do you know? Like, you know what? That's a great question. Let me ask the judge that, because the judge knows more than me. Or, I'm going to ask the partner at the firm, because you bring up a good point. You are more experienced than me, but I'm going to ask somebody else, right? So again, if the objective is I want you to sort of shrink down, I'm actually going to get up taller. Um, yeah, there's so much more to say about that. Oh, and also, if you wanted to have a more compassionate view, you could say like, oh, someone's bullying behavior is an example of them responding to some tough stuff in their life. Right? It has actually absolutely nothing to do with you or an objective to sort of get you uh, off your footing. They're just struggling. And so if that fits more with your personality and stuff, then you can have a more compassionate view of like, oh, that's sad that you're suffering so much that that's how you behave in
Mm.
public and in your job. And now I feel like there's distance. right? It's not about me. I don't feel under attack. I'm observing you struggle. And so like I feel sorry and some compassion for you. And I feel more protected because there's that sort of distance or layer of buffer.
Excellent. So we do have additional questions, but somebody did ask, they appreciated the information and the effective presentation. They'd like to view it with their full team. Where can we obtain the recording? Because you registered, you will receive the recording directly to your email, but we will also have it published on our website probably in a day or so. And you can go to our digital library on our website, lclma.org. Again, digital library, it is on the upper right-hand corner. Another question, and they are referring to your Mike Tyson comment. Should good preparation be to have a bullying sparring partner?
That's a good question. That can be one way to prepare, which is to literally like have someone that you trust and feel comfortable with, sort of present responses that you want to practice against in terms of that sparring partner. So like in boxing, you can shadow box, which is like to practice techniques in the air. You're not actually hitting a bag, you're not actually hitting a person. That's one level of practice, and just like thinking about techniques, getting comfortable with like what's involved, sort of running through them in your mind. Um, the next level of practice is like hitting a bag. Like it doesn't hit back, right? But I'm using these techniques. So maybe it's like saying it out loud and like running through a conversation where I'm saying it out loud. I'm practicing responses. Maybe I'm looking in the mirror and I'm like just practicing. What does this feel like to say this? In my imagined scenarios. And then a sparring partner is like you're actually trading blows with someone else, but the goal of that interaction isn't to harm you, it's to really just practice sort of what you're developing. And so that can be like another level of practice, which is if you have someone who can stand in as a sparring partner, particularly if it's a situation where like, I know I need more practice, right? I don't feel comfortable, let's say, in court responding in the moment to bullying from this opposing counsel and the judge isn't doing anything, but I want to feel more prepared, then you might want to do some role playing where you have somebody sort of stand in as the bully and like try to surprise you with over the top, insults or something or bullying tactics, just to practice responding to unexpected comments to get more comfortable with that. Right. So what's helpful in sort of like that sparring partner analogy is not to, practice a very specific response to a very specific comment, because that's the idea of having a plan as opposed to a strategy. So what is helpful is like have somebody just throw random things at you that you don't expect, that you're not prepared for, and just get more comfortable with injecting a pause, with different techniques in the moment. So you don't feel like I'm coming in prepared with a comment. I'm actually coming in to practice how to respond to this unexpected comment.
Excellent, excellent. We have, I'm going to read a little bit to prepare for the questions, so bear with me. This person's curious about using the language bully. In their experience, it's too easy for them to dismiss their own behavior when they use this word, and that maybe taking back control means looking at their own behavior, which may be 100% clean, but may also have some not so great tactics, and then being accountable for it if needed. What other words or labels might fit in lieu of bully for those like this person who may be using it to avoid taking a close look at their own behavior and contributions to the exchange?
I love that question. Yes, I think that is an excellent question because, quite frankly, like all of us have the potential to hurt other people, right? Like that saying goes, hurt people hurt people. And so, whether that's like the childhood bully or someone in the courtroom who you think has it all, right? Oftentimes, people who do that sort of thing, that in civil bullying behavior, they have been the recipient of that at some point. And so In the same way, if someone's bullying me, I have the potential as a hurt person to then hurt somebody else. Because there are times when I'm not my best. There are times when I'm feeling drained and I respond to a situation that isn't the best. I'm like, I don't want to be known for that. I don't want someone to define me based on that interaction. I don't want to be known as a bully because I was, causing harm to somebody else because I was hurt myself. So I think that's really helpful to, like, if the idea of using that framing of bully, meaning like somebody else, not me, somebody else, because I'm not a bully, that can be unhelpful in terms of just like, well, I'm better than that person, therefore there's nothing to see here, right? Look over there at the bully. Um, Versus actually looking at all of us, again, all of humanity, like we have the same ingredients, right? We're all those vulnerable kids inside, even though we have adult bodies, and we have the potential to both do well and also do not so well. So we all have the potential to harm others or to do something that we regret. And so it is really important to know that about ourselves, because that can help us have understanding for somebody else. It doesn't mean that you will agree with somebody else. So if someone has a pattern or an MO of being the most bullying pit bull attorney, and that's just how they're known, you don't have to sort of agree with that in order to say like, oh, they're a human being too who's hurting inside. Like I'm a human being who hurts inside too. Therefore, like I don't need to see them as totally opposite of me. I cannot like what they do, and that can also help me sort of evaluate like how am I responding, right? Am I responding um, to my stressors in a helpful and healthy way? Am I responding in a way that anyone observing me would be, I'd feel comfortable with them emulating me? Um, then also like looking at how I respond to a bully directly, like I want to make sure that I'm doing that in a way where I'm not just becoming the bully in that situation, right? I'm not using my options or my power to like break somebody down or harm them, but I do want to make sure that I'm using my power to like protect myself, to show other people how best to respond to this situation, and ultimately can't control this, but ultimately to show that bully, that person who's experiencing that bullying behavior or exhibiting that bullying behavior, to show them that like it's not an effective way to interact with me, or there's a better way to interact with me. So in addition to like removing the reward for bullying behavior, I can actually insert a reward for something more appropriate. So one quick example of that is someone sends me an email that's like has lots of vitriol in it, like really inappropriate bullying, unkind, messaging in it. But there's also like one line that's appropriate. The way that I remove the the reward for inappropriate behavior is I might choose to ignore the inappropriate stuff, and then I'm going to respond to the appropriate stuff and then insert a reward. Like, that's a really good point when you said this. And that's all I'm responding to. So I'm like, remove the reward for the bad stuff. I'm giving a reward for the good stuff. Like, good point in this one line. And let's just see how they respond.
That's an excellent point. So we have 1 minute left. I think a couple of these questions are really going to be a little bit too long to answer. Um, Somebody was talking about a public bullying event, and wondering, cameras are on, two people going after this one particular person, and how would you handle something like that? Again, on camera and two people really yelling at this one person.
So if
Again,
I was the person being yelled at by the other two
yes,
people,
yes. How would you?
um, yeah, obviously outside of that situation, it's easy for me to suggest how I would respond. It's totally different when you're in that situation and that's unexpected, right? Which is often the case. Like I wasn't expecting, like no one expects the Spanish Inquisition. I wasn't expected to be, attacked by two people or yelled at on camera. What I would hope that I would do is to remain calm, remain confident, and to sort of address the 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 underlying situation that is important to me in a way that is clear that I'm not engaging in like a side agenda, but to sort of stick to what's important to me. And again, that's easy to say when you're not in that situation, um, but it's often the case where like, and this is true for all of us. Like when you go through a situation and afterwards you look back and like, oh, I wish I had done something differently, right? It's helpful to see those situations as like it's a learning opportunity, like everything else in life, for me to sort of gain more skills and build my resilience, right? Building my resilience is like I'm going to learn from that, and I'm going to be able to do something different in the future, as opposed to like, oh, I wish I could go back and like redo all that. So if you have those situations where like I was caught off guard, wasn't prepared, and I didn't respond the way that I ultimately would have liked to have, instead of replaying it, kind of like thinking about like what can that prepare me for next time? How can I sort of use that as a way to sort of sharpen my skills more? But it's easier said than done.
Right, right. Well, we are just a touch past 1 o'clock. We want to be respectful of everybody's time, but thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Healy, for again, wonderful information. We are getting a lot of thank yous through the chat and through the Q&A. You will be also receiving a feedback form. If you could fill that out, this would always be so helpful. Again, that was great, Shawn. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us today, and hopefully you will join us again. Our presentation actually is next week. We have a full hour webinar with Dr. Jeff Fortgang on the hidden costs of social drinking. So thank you all again, and we will see you in just another week.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.